I spent the drive to Cresthaven rehearsing neutral sentences, treating Thanksgiving dinner like a high-stakes performance review. For 33 years. I had chased my parents' affection like it was a prize to be won, but I never expected them to change the rules so publicly. When I walked into the dining room, my chair was gone. In its place sat a polished wooden sign that read, simply, "No seat for disappointments." The asphalt of Interstate 95 was a gray ribbon stretching out before me, dull and endless under the slate sky of a Maryland November. I gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my knuckles white against the leather, rehearsing my lines for the afternoon as if I were preparing for a deposition rather than Thanksgiving dinner. "That is interesting. Mom, I am so glad Evan is finding himself. No, I cannot stay late tonight. Miles has an early morning. The sweet potatoes look delicious." I repeated the phrases aloud, testing the cadence of my own voice in the quiet cabin of the car. The goal was neutrality. The goal was to be a gray rock, smooth, uninteresting, and impossible to hurt. For 33 years, entering my parents' home in Cresthaven had felt less like a homecoming and more like walking into a performance review where the criteria for passing were invisible and constantly shifting. My mother, Lorna, valued appearance above oxygen. My father, Grant, valued compliance above currency, and together, they had built a family dynamic that operated like a small, volatile corporation where I was the reliable but underappreciated middle manager, and my younger brother, Evan, was the charismatic CEO who bankrupts the company but still gets a golden parachute. I merged into the right lane, watching the suburban sprawl thicken into the manicured, gated reality of Cresthaven. My stomach twisted, a familiar knot of dread that I had never quite outgrown. It had been 3 weeks since the last fallout. The memory played in my head, vivid and sharp. Evan had called me on a Tuesday, his voice pitched high with that specific frantic energy he used when he needed money. He had found a generic investment opportunity, something involving cryptocurrency and shipping containers, and he needed $5,000 by Friday to buy in. I had said no. It was the first time in my adult life I had delivered a flat, unconditional refusal. Usually, I bargained. Usually, I gave half. Usually, I let them guilt me into loaning money I knew I would never see again because the alternative, the cold silence, the disappointment, the accusations of selfishness, was too painful to bear. But Miles and I were looking at buying a new house in the spring. We were trying to start a family. I had simply said, "I cannot do it, Evan." The backlash had been immediate. My mother had called me an hour later, weeping about how I was abandoning my brother when he was finally turning a corner. My father had sent a curt email listing all the expenses they had covered for me as a child, from braces to ballet lessons, implying a debt that could never be fully repaid. I had held my ground, and now I was driving into the lion's den to see if the silence was truly over, or if I was walking into a trap. Earlier that morning, Miles had stood in our kitchen, watching me pack a homemade pumpkin pie into a travel carrier. He was leaning against the granite island, his arms crossed, his face tight with worry. "You do not have to go." "Brooklyn," he had said, his voice low, "we can stay here. We can order Chinese food and watch bad movies. You do not owe them your holiday." I had paused, my hands resting on the cool plastic of the pie carrier. "I know," I had said, "but if I stay away, they win. They get to tell everyone I am the bitter, ungrateful daughter who thinks she is too good for the family. I need to go. I need to show them that I can stand in that room and not crumble just because they are disappointed in me." Miles had sighed, walking over to wrap his arms around me from behind. He rested his chin on the top of my head. "Okay, but we have a rule. If it turns ugly, you leave, no bargaining, no trying to fix it. You just walk out. I promise." I had whispered. I had insisted on driving alone. Miles had offered to come as a shield, but I needed to do this by myself. I needed to prove that the 33-year-old woman who managed a team of 20 people and navigated complex corporate contracts was not the same scared little girl who used to hide in the pantry when her father raised his voice. I turned the car onto Maple Ridge Drive. The houses here were large, imposing colonials set far back from the street, their lawns carpeted in leaves that had been professionally raked into perfect, unobtrusive piles. My parents' house was at the end of the cul-de-sac, a sprawling brick structure that looked less like a home and more like a fortress of upper-middle-class ambition. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the first oddity. The house looked staged, usually. On Thanksgiving, the front porch would be cluttered with pumpkins and muddy boots, and the garage door would be half open with my father's golf clubs spilling out. Today, the driveway was swept clean. The front door wreath was perfectly centered. The curtains were drawn in a uniform way across every window. It looked like the photo on a real estate listing. I parked my sedan next to Evan's flashy leased sports car, a vehicle he definitely could not afford, and took a deep breath. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick was a polite shade of mauve. My hair was pulled back. I looked calm. I looked professional. I grabbed the pie and walked up the path. Lorna opened the door before I could ring the bell. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and stiff dark jeans, her hair coiffed into a helmet of blonde perfection. There was a smile plastered on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning me, looking for a loose thread, a scuff on my shoe, a sign of weakness. "Brooklyn!" she exclaimed, her voice an octave higher than normal. "You made it. We were worried traffic would be dreadful." "It was fine," I said. Stepping into the foyer, the house smelled of sage and roasting turkey, a scent that triggered a confusing mix of nostalgia and nausea. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." She kissed the air next to my cheek, avoiding actual contact. "You look tired," she said, her smile never wavering. "Working too hard, I assume." "You really should take a page from Evan's book and focus on work-life balance." I bit the inside of my cheek. Evan had not held a steady job in 4 years. "I am doing well. Thank you," I said, keeping my tone even. "Where is Dad?" "In the living room with your brother," she said, ushering me forward. "Go say hello. I will take that pie." Although I already made 2, so we probably didn't need it. I handed her the pie without a word and walked into the living room. My father, Grant, was standing by the fireplace, staring at his smartphone. He was wearing a crisp button-down shirt tucked into khakis. Looking every inch the suburban patriarch, he didn't look up when I entered. He was typing furiously, his brow furrowed. Evan was lounging on the sofa, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked up and smirked. "There she is, the corporate titan." "Hello, Evan?" I said. "Hi, Dad." Grant glanced up, his eyes darting to me and then back to his screen. He looked distracted, almost nervous. "Hello, Brooklyn," he said absently. "Glad you could make the drive." "Is everything okay?" I asked, noting the way he kept refreshing his email. "Fine," Grant snapped, then softened his tone instantly. "Just business. Even on holidays. The world keeps turning, right?" The room felt strange. Usually, the television would be blaring football. Usually, there would be bowls of snacks on the coffee table. Today, the surfaces were clear. The air felt static, charged with an anticipation I couldn't place. It felt like walking onto a stage before the curtain went up. "Dinner is ready," Lorna called from the dining room. "Let's sit down before everything gets cold." We migrated toward the dining room. My stomach gave another violent twist. I told myself it was just anxiety. I told myself they were just being their usual, difficult selves. I walked through the archway and stopped. The dining room had been rearranged. Typically, the large mahogany table was set for 4, with the extra leaves removed to make it intimate. Today, the table was fully extended, but the chairs were positioned strangely. My father's head chair was at the far end. My mother's was opposite him. Evan's chair was on the right side, centered perfectly with a full place setting, crystal wine glass, folded napkin, polished silverware, on the left side of the table, where I always sat. There was a gap. I blinked. Thinking I was misseeing it, I looked closer. There was no chair. The space where my seat should have been was empty. The hardwood floor gleamed under the chandelier light. But on the table, right in front of the empty space, sat a small, dark object. It was a wooden plaque. It looked like something you would buy at a high-end home goods store, the kind with witty sayings about wine or coffee. It was dark walnut with carved, gold leaf lettering. I stepped closer, the breath catching in my throat. The sign read, "No seat for disappointments." The silence in the room was absolute. It lasted for perhaps 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I stared at the words, my brain trying to process the sheer absurdity of it. It wasn't a handwritten note. It wasn't a sticky note. It was a manufactured, engraved sign. Someone had ordered this. Someone had paid for this. Someone had waited for it to be delivered. Then, the laughter started. It began with Evan, a sharp, barking laugh that sounded forced. "Oh man," he said, clutching his drink. "Look at her face. I told you she would freeze." Then my mother joined in. A tittering, nervous sound. "It is just a bit of fun." "Brooklyn." "Oh, lighten up." I looked at my father. He wasn't laughing. He was watching me with a cold, clinical curiosity, like a scientist observing a rat in a maze. He wanted to see what I would do. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. But it wasn't embarrassment. It was clarity. A cold, sharp clarity that cut through the years of fog. This wasn't a joke. This was punishment. This was the price for saying no to the $5,000. I turned to my mother. "Where is my chair?" I asked. My voice was quiet. It didn't shake. Lorna waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be dramatic. We had to send 2 of the chairs out for reupholstering. We simply didn't have enough for the main table this year. There are 6 chairs in this set." "Mom," I said, gesturing to the corners of the room where the other chairs usually sat as decoration. They were gone. "Well, we are downsizing." Grant cut in. He walked over to his seat at the head of the table and rested his hands on the back of it. "We are simplifying our lives, getting rid of dead weight." Evan snickered again. "It is just a joke. Brooke, don't make it weird. Just roll with it." I looked at the sign again. No seat for disappointments. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was so specific, so tailored to my deepest insecurity. The fear that no matter how much I achieved, how much I gave, I would never be enough for them. "So where am I supposed to eat?" I asked, looking directly at my father. Grant smiled. It was a tight, thin smile that showed his teeth. "You can sit on the bench in the kitchen," he said. The air left the room. The kitchen bench was a small, backless stool tucked under the breakfast bar. It was where we put the mail. It was where the cleaning crew sat to take their breaks. "It is where the help eats," Grant added, delivering the line with the timing of a man who had practiced it in the mirror. He picked up his wineglass and swirled the liquid, watching me. The insult was designed to break me. It was designed to make me cry, to make me beg, to make me apologize for refusing to bankroll my brother's delusions. They wanted a scene. They wanted the satisfaction of my public collapse so they could comfort me and then own me again. They wanted me to drag a stool from the kitchen and sit at the corner of the table, lower than everyone else, grateful for the scraps. I looked at Evan, who was smirking, waiting for me to explode. I looked at Lorna, who was feigning innocence, waiting for me to apologize for being upset. I looked at Grant, who was waiting for me to submit. I thought of Miles. If it turns ugly, you leave. It wasn't just ugly, it was grotesque. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't the panic I usually felt. It was a heavy, solid weight. The anchor was lifting. The tether that had bound me to these people for 3 decades snapped. It didn't make a sound. It just severed. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not demand an explanation. I simply nodded. "You are right," I said. The room went quiet. They hadn't expected agreement. I reached into my purse and pulled out my car keys. The metal felt cool and jagged in my palm. I will not make it weird, I said. I turned around and walked toward the front door. For a second, nobody moved. They were stunned. They had written a script where I cried, and I was going off book. Then I heard the scrape of a chair and the click of heels. "Brooklyn!" Lorna called out. I didn't stop. I walked through the foyer, past the staged living room, past the perfect wreath. I reached the front door and put my hand on the knob. Lorna scrambled in front of me, placing her body between me and the exit. Her face was flushed now, her composure cracking. "Where do you think you are going?" she hissed. "I am leaving," I said calmly. "I am going home to my husband." "You cannot just leave," she said, her voice rising to a shriek. "It is Thanksgiving. We have a turkey. We have guests coming over for dessert later." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the fear behind her eyes. It wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of losing the audience. It was fear of having to explain to the neighbors why her daughter walked out before dinner. "Move, Mom," I said. "Do not ruin Thanksgiving." "Brooklyn?" she pleaded, switching tactics instantly to guilt. Her eyes welled with practiced tears. "We just wanted to have a nice family dinner." "It was a joke. Can you not take a joke? Why do you always have to be so sensitive?" I looked back toward the dining room. I could see the empty space at the table. I could see the sign. "You already ruined it," I said. Lorna froze. "I am just refusing to participate," I added. I reached around her, unlatched the door, and stepped out into the cold November air. "Wait!" Grant's voice boomed from the hallway. He was storming toward us now, his face red. "If you walk out that door, do not expect a plate to be saved. You are acting like a child." I didn't look back. I walked down the brick path to my car. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I felt lightheaded. I had done it. I had actually done it. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking now, a delayed reaction to the confrontation. I put the key in the ignition, but before I could turn it, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I stared at it. It wasn't Miles. It wasn't my parents. It was an unknown number. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. I unlocked it and opened the message. The text was short. "They are doing this on purpose. Please do not sign anything they send." I stared at the words, the white text on the gray background. The world outside my car windows seemed to blur. They are doing this on purpose. The chair, the sign, the staged house. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a distraction. It was a tactic. Please do not sign anything they send. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather settled deep in my bones. I hadn't signed anything in years, or so I thought. I thought about the emails I had ignored from my father recently. I thought about the vague administrative updates. I thought about Evan's desperate need for money. I looked back at the house, through the front window. I could see my parents arguing in the foyer. Evan was standing behind them, looking out the window, looking right at my car. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked terrified. I realized then that the "no seat for disappointment" sign wasn't the end of the story. It was the prologue. I put the car in reverse, backed out of the driveway, and drove away from the perfect house on the perfect street, leaving my family, and whatever trap they had set for me, in the rearview mirror. But the text message burned in my mind, a warning flare in the dark. I wasn't just disappointed, I was a target, and I had no idea how deep the bullseye went. I merged back onto the main road, the silence of the car deafening, and dialed Miles. But as the phone rang, I didn't feel relief. I felt the creeping, icy sensation of a person who realizes they have been sleepwalking through a minefield. I needed to find out who sent that text, and I needed to find out what, exactly, I was supposed to have signed. The rehearsal was over. The real performance was about to begin. The drive home from Cresthaven was a blur of highway markers and taillights, a vacuum of time where my brain refused to process the last hour. I drove in silence, the radio off, the hum of the tires on the asphalt, the only sound tethering me to reality. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the site of our townhouse, modest, brick, with the porch light Miles had left on for me, felt like a hallucination. It was too normal. It was too safe. I walked inside, and the smell of our home, coffee beans and cedar, hit me like a physical embrace. Miles was in the living room, a book on his lap, but he was not reading. He stood up the moment the door clicked shut, his eyes scanning my face for tear tracks or bruises. "You are back early," he said, his voice carefully neutral. I set my purse on the entryway table. I did not cry. I felt a strange, crystalline hardness settling in my chest, displacing the hurt. They removed my chair. "Miles," I said. He blinked, confusion knitting his brow. "They what?" "At the table. They took away my chair. They put a sign in its place that said, 'No seat for disappointments.' Then they told me I could eat in the kitchen on the help's bench." Miles stared at me, his mouth opening slightly. He looked for the punchline, just as I had, but when he saw the dead seriousness in my eyes, his expression darkened into a terrifying shade of anger. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled me into his arms. I stood stiffly against him for a moment before melting. Exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding since I parked in my parents' driveway. "I am going to drive back there," Miles said into my hair, his voice vibrating with a low, dangerous rumble. "I am going to drive back there, and I am going to put a chair through their window." "No," I said, pulling back to look at him. "No. That is what they want. They want a reaction. They want us to be the crazy ones. This is not a reaction. Brooklyn, this is insane. Who does that? Who does that to their daughter? People who are done pretending," I said. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. That was the thing that scared me the most. How steady I was. The humiliation had burned off, leaving behind a cold, charred landscape of realization. It wasn't a joke. Miles, Mom kept saying it was a joke, but it wasn't. It was a structural change. It was a demotion. I leaned against the counter, the glass cool against my palm. Think about it. They have always treated love like a currency. When I got good grades, I got affection. When I got promoted, I got praise. When I refused to give Evan $5,000 3 weeks ago, the currency was devalued. The chair wasn't just them being mean. It was a notification. "A notification of what?" Miles asked, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed tight over his chest. "That my subscription has expired." I said, "Unless I pay, I do not get a seat. I am disposable now." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I flinched, the muscle memory of panic kicking in. I pulled it out. It was the unknown number again. "It is about the house. And your name." I stared at the screen. The sender had texted me earlier, warning me not to sign anything. Now they were getting specific. I typed back, my thumbs moving quickly. "Who is this?" The reply came 3 bubbles later. Hesitating, "A friend of Evan's. I cannot say more. Just check your credit." I looked up at Miles. "I need my laptop," I said. We sat at the dining room table, the remains of a Tuesday night dinner pushed to the side. The laptop screen glowed in the dim light, casting long shadows across the room. Miles sat next to me, a silent sentry. While I logged into my email, I searched for my father's name, Grant Mitchell. Hundreds of emails populated the list. Most were forwarded jokes, political rants, or guilt-tripping inquiries about why I hadn't visited recently, but I was looking for something specific. I scrolled back to October. Around the time Evan had asked for the money, there it was. Subject: Family Finance Update/Admin Stuff. I clicked it open. My father's typing style was distinctive, lots of capital letters and exclamation points, breathless and demanding. "Brooklyn, hope work is good. Mom and I are tidying up some estate planning things, boring stuff, but necessary for the future. We may need your signature for something administrative. No big deal. Just updating beneficiaries and trust details. We'll send over a DocuSign link soon. Keep an eye out. Love, Dad." I had ignored it. I was busy with a merger at work, and estate planning sounded like one of his usual exaggerations to make himself feel like a tycoon. I hadn't replied. I checked the date. October 12th. 3 days before Evan asked for the $5,000, I scrolled forward. No DocuSign link had ever arrived, or at least, I hadn't seen one. I checked my spam folder. Nothing. I checked my trash. Nothing. If they needed my signature, I said, tapping the screen. Why didn't they follow up? Dad chases me for days if I don't respond to a text about the weather. This was about estate planning, and he just let it drop? Maybe they realized they didn't need it, Miles suggested, or maybe they found a way to get it without me. I said, the thought made my stomach turn over. I picked up my phone again and looked at the text from the stranger, a friend of Evan's. If this person was Evan's friend, they knew the family dynamic. They knew Evan was the golden boy who could do no wrong, and I was the safety net. I need to call Aunt Denise, I said. Miles raised an eyebrow. Denise? I thought we were avoiding the Klein side of the family. We are. Usually. She is dramatic and she drinks too much Chardonnay and tells everyone their business. But she is also the only person in the family my father cannot bully because she has her own money. If there is gossip, Denise knows it. I dialed her number. It rang 4 times before she picked up. The background noise was loud, clinking glasses and laughter. Brooklyn? She shouted. Happy Thanksgiving. Honey, I heard you made a swift exit. Good for you. That sign was tacky even for Lorna. You heard about the sign? I asked. Honey, everyone heard about the sign. Your cousin Sarah posted a picture of it on Instagram before you even got there. She captioned it, Family Drama Loading. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. Aunt Denise, I said, keeping my voice low, I need to ask you something serious, and I need you to not tell my parents I asked. The line went quiet. I could hear her stepping away from the noise. A door closed. Okay, she said, her voice dropping an octave. I am in the pantry. What is going on? Has Dad said anything to you about money lately? About the house? Or the foundation? Denise hesitated. The silence stretched long enough to make me nervous. Denise? Look, Brooklyn, she said, her voice raspy. You know I love your father. He is my brother, but he has been manic lately. He called me last week asking about liquidating some old bonds Mom left us. He was talking about protecting family assets and moving things around before the fiscal year ends. Did he say why? He said the market was volatile, but Grant always says the market is volatile when he makes bad bets. He sounded squeezed. Brooklyn. He asked if I could loan him $20,000 for a bridge gap. My heart hammered. $20,000. Did you give it to him? Hell no. Denise snorted. I told him to sell one of those ridiculous cars. He got nasty. Said I was selfish. Said I did not understand legacy. Legacy. I repeated. That was Grant's favorite word. It usually meant his reputation. Did he mention me? I asked. He said. Denise paused again. He said you were being difficult. He said he was restructuring the estate so that the people who actually contribute get the rewards. He made it sound like you were cutting them off. I felt a surge of nausea. He was rewriting the narrative before I even knew the plot. Thanks. Aunt Denise, please don't tell him we spoke. I won't. But Brooklyn, watch your back. Your father gets desperate when he thinks he is losing control. And right now, he sounds desperate. I hung up. Miles was watching me. What did she say? Dad is broke, I said, or close to it. He is trying to borrow money from Denise, and he is talking about restructuring. I turned back to the laptop. I need to see exactly how much I have given them over the years. I logged into my bank account. I had been with the same bank since college, so the records went back over a decade. I searched for transfers to my parents, to Evan, to the Mitford Hearth Foundation, the charity my parents ran, which I had always suspected was just a tax shelter for their social climbing expenses. The list was longer than I expected. August, $400 to Evan. Reason, car repair. July, $600 to Lorna. Reason, short on the catering bill for the gala. May, $1,200 to Grant. Reason, temporary liquidity for the insurance premium. I scrolled back years. It was a drip feed of financial bleeding. $50 here, $1,000 there. Medical bills for Evan's anxiety treatments that were likely cover for something else. Tuition supplements. Loans that were never repaid. I pulled out a notepad and started adding it up. 5,000, 10,000, 20. By the time I got to the bottom of the list, the total was over $45,000 in the last 6 years. I stared at the number. That was a down payment on a house. That was a college fund for a child we didn't have yet. And I had never seen a bill. I realized with a jolt of shame that I had never asked for proof. When my father said the insurance premium was due, I just wired the money. When Evan said his car broke down, I just sent the cash. I had been so desperate to be the good daughter, the reliable one, that I had bypassed basic due diligence. I paid for a lifestyle I was not allowed to participate in. I whispered. Miles reached out and covered my hand with his. We stop it now. No more transfers. It is not just the transfers. Miles, I said, my mind racing back to the text message. It is about the house and your name. I opened a new tab. I typed in the address of the credit reporting agency. I need to check my credit report. I had not checked it in months. We were planning to apply for a mortgage in the spring. So I knew my score was excellent. Somewhere in the high 700s. I was obsessive about paying bills on time. I answered the security questions. What was the make of your first car? Which of these streets have you lived on? And waited for the wheel to spin. The report loaded. I scanned the summary. Total debt, manageable, payment history, 100%. Then I scrolled down to the section labeled Inquiries. My breath hitched. There, at the top of the list, dated November 2nd, 3 weeks ago, was a hard inquiry. Harbor Sage Lending. I froze. I had never heard of Harbor Sage Lending. I had not applied for a loan, a credit card, or a mortgage in the last year. Miles, look at this. He leaned in, squinting at the screen. Harbor Sage? Who are they? I don't know, but they pulled my credit. A hard pull. That means someone applied for something using my social security number. I clicked on the details. The inquiry origin was listed as a generic box in Delaware. My stomach dropped through the floor. Someone tried to take out a loan in my name. I said. Miles stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That is fraud. That is identity theft. We need to call the police. Wait, I said, grabbing his wrist. Wait for what? Brooklyn, if this was a stranger, we would be on the phone with the cops right now. But it is not a stranger. Is it? I said, my voice trembling. It is November 2nd. That is 2 days after I told Evan I wouldn't give him the money. Miles looked at me, his face hard. That makes it worse. If your brother or your parents used your identity because you told them no, that is criminal. Brooklyn, you cannot protect them from this. I am not trying to protect them, I snapped, the stress finally fraying my composure. I am trying to protect us. If I call the police right now, what do I have? A credit inquiry? That is it. I don't know if a loan was opened. I don't know if they just tried and failed. If I accuse them without proof, they will gaslight me until I think I'm crazy. They will say it was a mistake, a computer glitch, or that I gave them permission and forgot. I stood up and paced the small living room. I need to know what was signed. I need to know if there is a debt. I grabbed my phone. I am calling Avery. Avery Halden was a consumer protection attorney I had met at a networking event years ago. She was sharp, cynical, and specialized in financial fraud. It was late, Thanksgiving night. But I sent her a text. Emergency, family financial issue, need a consult. ASAP. Please, I didn't expect a reply until Friday, but 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Call me tomorrow at 9. Do not talk to them until we speak. The next morning, the world felt gray and hungover, though I hadn't had a drop of alcohol. Miles went to work, reluctant to leave me, but I insisted. I needed the space to think. I sat in my home office, the phone on speaker. Avery Halden's voice was crisp and devoid of the pity I feared. Okay, Brooklyn, walk me through it. I told her everything. The chair, the text message, the email about admin stuff, the hard inquiry from Harbor Sage. When I finished, there was a heavy pause on the line. "You are right to be worried," Avery said, "and you are right not to call the police just yet." "Why?" I asked. "Because family financial abuse is messy. It rarely looks like a stranger hacking your account. It looks like paperwork you didn't read. It looks like joint applications where one party wasn't in the room. If you go to the cops now, your parents will say it was a misunderstanding, or that you verbally agreed to co-sign something to help the family. Without the underlying documents, it is your word against theirs, and they have the perfect family reputation. So what do? You freeze everything," Avery commanded. "Freezing your credit is step 1. Step 2 is getting the file from HarborSage. You need to write a formal dispute letter demanding the application that triggered the inquiry. If your signature is on it, we need to see it. And if it is forged, then we have a weapon. But Brooklyn, listen to me. If they are desperate enough to pull your credit without asking, they are desperate enough to do other things. Check your property titles. Check for accounts you don't know about. And for God's sake, do not sign anything. Not a birthday card. Not a receipt. Nothing." I hung up, feeling a mix of validation and nausea. Family financial abuse. Hearing a professional say the words made it real. It wasn't just my family being difficult, it was predation. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. I needed to gauge their temperature. I needed to see if they were panicking yet. I picked up my phone and dialed the landline at my parents' house. Lorna answered on the second ring. Her voice was bright, airy, completely discordant with the scene yesterday. "Mitchell Residence. Hi. Mom?" I said. "Oh, Brooklyn." Her tone dropped 50 degrees. "I assume you are calling to apologize for the scene you caused yesterday. Mrs. Gabley asked where you were, and I had to tell her you had a migraine. It was humiliating." "I am not calling to apologize," I said. Keeping my voice neutral, "I am calling to ask about the chair." "I told you it was a joke," she snapped. "A little Thanksgiving humor." God, you used to have a sense of fun. It didn't feel like a joke. Mom, it felt like you were pushing me out. Grant's voice suddenly boomed on the line. He must have picked up the extension in the study. "If you are so sensitive. Brooklyn, maybe you should skip holidays from now on." "Dad?" I said. "You heard me?" Grant yelled. "We are trying to build a future for this family, and you are acting like a victim because of a piece of wood. If you don't want to be part of the team, then stay on the bench." The line clicked dead. He had hung up. Lorna sighed. "You see what you do to him? He has high blood pressure. Brooklyn, you are killing him." She hung up too. I sat holding the silent phone. If you don't want to be part of the team, then stay on the bench. They weren't trying to reconcile. They were doubling down. And Grant's comment, "Maybe you should skip holidays," it wasn't a punishment. It was a strategy. They wanted me gone. They wanted me out of the house, out of the loop, away from the conversations. Why, though? Because you can't commit fraud against someone who is sitting across the table asking questions. My phone pinged, a voice note from Evan. I hesitated, then pressed play. Evan's voice sounded thick, like he had been crying or drinking. "Brooke, look, don't be mad at Mom and Dad. We are all under pressure here. Dad is trying to keep things together. The market is killing him. He is just trying to make sure we don't lose the house. You can fix this, okay? You have the steady job. You have the credit. Just help him, please. You can fix this." The recording ended. "You can fix this." The words triggered a Pavlovian response in me. For 20 years, that had been my role. Fix Evan's grades, fix the broken vase, fix the scheduling conflict, fix the overdraft fee, but this time, fix meant pay. I went back to my laptop. I went back to that email from October 12th. Family finance update. I had opened it before, but I hadn't looked at the attachments closely because I assumed they were just generic newsletters. I clicked on the paperclip icon. There was a PDF titled draft_guar_v3.pdf. I opened it. It was a scanned document, a personal guarantee of debt. I scanned the legalese. It was a guarantee for a business line of credit in the amount of $200,000, secured by the assets of the guarantor. I scrolled to the bottom. There were 2 signature lines. The first was signed by Grant Mitchell. The second line was blank, but underneath the blank line, typed clearly in the same font as the rest of the document, was a name. Brooklyn A. Mitchell. I stared at my name. They hadn't just thought about asking me. They had drawn up the papers. They had typed my name into a legal contract binding me to $200,000 of debt for a business that I knew nothing about. The date on the document was October 10th. They had prepared this before asking me. They had assumed I would sign. They had assumed that when they put the paper in front of me and said, "Just administrative stuff," I would pick up the pen and sign my life away because I was the good daughter, and when I didn't sign, when I didn't reply to the email, when I refused to give Evan the $5,000. They got angry. They removed my seat. But the question remained. The signature line on this draft was blank. So why did Harbor Sage pull my credit 3 weeks later? A terrifying thought crystallized in my mind. Maybe they didn't need me to sign it anymore. Maybe they found someone else to sign it as me. I printed the document. The whir of the printer sounded like a tank rolling into position. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I was the prosecution. I grabbed a red pen and circled the date. I circled my name. Then I circled the name of the lender listed at the top of the guarantee. The Harbor Sage Inquiry. The circle was closed. I picked up my phone and texted Miles. "I have the proof. Come home." The office of Avery Halden was located in a glass and steel building in downtown Baltimore, a stark contrast to the warm, suffocating velvet of my parents' home in Crest Haven. Here, the air was filtered and cool, smelling of toner and industrial carpet. Miles sat beside me, his knee bouncing nervously, while Avery reviewed the printout of the draft guarantee I had found in my father's email. Avery was a woman of sharp angles and even sharper words. She did not offer tea. She offered strategy. She placed the paper on the desk and smoothed it flat with a manicured hand. "This is a draft," she said, her voice devoid of inflection. "It is not a signed contract. However, the fact that it exists, coupled with the hard inquiry on your credit report, suggests intent." She looked up, her gaze piercing. "You need to understand the battlefield. Brooklyn, you are treating this like a misunderstanding. You think if you just explain to them that you do not want to be in debt, they will stop." I looked at my hands. I suppose I did think that. Somewhere deep down, they will not stop. Avery continued, "This is not about their feelings. This is about their survival. If your father is as leveraged as this document suggests, he is drowning. A drowning man does not care if he pulls you under. He just wants air." Miles leaned forward. "So what do we do? Do we call the police?" "Not yet," Avery said. "Not until we have the smoking gun. If you call the police now, your parents will claim it was a clerical error. They will claim they were just shopping rates and put Brooklyn's name down as a placeholder. They will play the confused elderly couple, and the police, who hate financial crimes because they are tedious, will tell you it is a civil matter." She slid a notepad across the desk. "Here is your homework. 1. You freeze everything. Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. Lock them down so tight a fly could not open a store credit card in your name. 2. You document every interaction. No more phone calls. If they call, you let it go to voicemail. You want a paper trail. 3. You get the file from Harbor Sage." "How?" I asked. "You send a dispute letter." Avery said, "I will draft it. We demand the original application. We want to see the IP address it came from. We want to see the security questions that were answered." She paused, her expression softening just a fraction. "And Brooklyn? You need to prepare yourself." "For what?" "For what you're going to find." She said, "Identity theft is rarely committed by strangers. Strangers want your money. Family wants your money. But they also feel entitled to it. When you see the proof, it is going to hurt more than you expect." The drive back from the city was quiet. Miles went to work, and I took the day off, claiming a migraine. It was not a lie. My head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain that sat right behind my eyes. I spent the afternoon sitting on my living room floor, Surrounded by a scatter of old journals and printed screenshots of text messages, Avery had told me to document everything, so I went back 3 years. As I read through the history of my digital relationship with my parents, a pattern emerged. It was so obvious I felt stupid for never seeing it before. It was a cycle, as predictable as the tides. February. 2 years ago. I told my mother I could not cater her bridge club lunch because I had a board meeting. The response: 3 weeks of silence. Then, a text from Evan saying Mom was really down and feeling neglected. The resolution: I sent her a $300 spa gift card. She called me immediately, happy and chatting as if nothing had happened. August, last year. I set a boundary about them calling me at work for non-emergencies. The response: Grant made a joke at the Labor Day barbecue about how I was too corporate for the little people. The family laughed. I felt small. The resolution: I paid for the catering at the barbecue. It was a machine. Input boundary, receive punishment. Input money, receive love. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. I flinched. The trauma response was getting faster. It was the unknown number again. I stared at the screen. I had not saved the contact, but the thread was becoming the most honest conversation I had going. Evan did not start this. He is panicking too. I read the text 3 times. Evan did not start this. For my entire life, the narrative had been simple. Evan was the mess, and my parents were the weary caretakers trying to clean up after him. Evan needed bail money. Evan needed rent. Evan needed a car. I had always resented him for draining them, for making them so stressed that they had no emotional bandwidth left for me. But what if that wasn't true? I typed back, "Who are you?" The reply was immediate. "Someone who sees the books." I froze. The books. I typed again. If Evan didn't start it, who did? The dots bubbled, then disappeared, then bubbled again. Grant. Evan is just the excuse. Grant uses Evan's failures to explain where the money goes, but Evan doesn't see half of it. My phone slipped from my fingers and hit the rug. I sat back, my back against the sofa, and let the implication wash over me. I had spent decades thinking my parents were victims of a wayward son. But if this stranger was right, they were using Evan as a shield. They were using his incompetence to mask their own greed. They were cannibalizing both of us. I needed to know if it was true. I needed to talk to Harbor Sage. I pulled up the number for the lender, a direct line Avery had given me, bypassing the main customer service queue. My hand shook as I dialed. "This is the fraud department. Agent Miller speaking." I cleared my throat. "My name is Brooklyn Mitchell. My attorney advised me to call regarding an inquiry on my credit report dated November 2nd. There was a clicking of keys. "One moment. Ms. Mitchell, verification, please. Last 4 of your social?" I gave them. "Date of birth?" I gave it. "Okay, I see the file." Agent Miller said, "It is flagged as pending incomplete." The application was started online but never finalized. "Can you tell me what address was used on the application?" I asked. "I can only verify if you match it." He said, "Was it—" I hesitated. "Was it 14 Maple Ridge Drive?" That was my parents' address. "No." Agent Miller said. I frowned. "Was it 2B Elm Street?" My current address. "No." I closed my eyes, thinking, what other address would they use? Then I remembered a specific detail from college. My father had insisted on co-signing my first apartment lease for credit purposes, even though I had a scholarship that covered housing. He had kept that address on file for years for some of his mail. Was it 304 University Avenue, apartment 4? There was a pause. "Yes, that is the address we have." The air left my lungs. That address was 10 years old. I hadn't lived there since I was 22. The only people who would use that address were people who were working off old files. People who had a dossier on me from a decade ago. "Okay," I said, my voice steadying. "Can you tell me the security questions?" "I cannot give you the answers, but I can tell you the questions selected to secure the account. Please. Question 1. What was the name of your first pet? Question 2. What is your mother's middle name? Question 3. In what city did you meet your spouse? I felt a cold shiver walk down my spine. My first pet was a hamster named Barnaby. My mother's middle name was Elizabeth. But the third question, in what city did you meet your spouse? I met Miles in Chicago, at a conference. But my parents didn't know that. They thought I met him in D.C. because that was where I first introduced him. I had never corrected them because they never asked for the details of my life. I realized with a jolt that if they answered DRC, the application would fail. Did they get the third question right? I asked. Agent Miller paused. That is actually where the application stalled. Ms. Mitchell, the system locked out after 3 failed attempts on the security questions. I almost laughed. It was a dark, hysterical bubble in my throat. They failed to steal my identity because they didn't know me well enough. Their lack of interest in my life had actually saved my credit score. Thank you, I said. Please flag this application as fraudulent. I hung up. I sat in the silence of my house, feeling the weight of the betrayal. It wasn't just the money, it was the intimacy of the violation. They had used Barnaby. They had used my mother's name. They had tried to wear my skin to rob a bank, and they had only failed because the zipper got stuck. I needed to talk to someone who understood Grant Mitchell's mind. I called Aunt Denise. She picked up on the first ring, which was unusual for her. Brooklyn? Is everything okay? No, I said, but I am learning things. I told her about Harbor Sage. I told her about the old address. Denise sighed. A long, rattling sound. I am not surprised. Honey, I wish I was. Denise, I asked, why does he do it? He has the house, the cars, the foundation. Why does he need the money? Because it is never enough. Denise said, Grant has a hole in him the size of the Grand Canyon. He needs to be the big man, the provider, the philanthropist. But he is terrible with money. He always has been. He makes bad investments. And then he doubles down to try and win it back. It is a gambler's fallacy. But he gambles with other people's assets. She paused. He tried to do it to me. 10 years ago, you said he asked for a loan. I said, no, Denise said sharply. He didn't ask. He tried to forge my signature on a home equity line of credit. I caught him because the notary called me to confirm the appointment. My jaw dropped. He forged your signature? He tried. When I confronted him, he didn't apologize. He got angry. He said I was selfish. He said I was hoarding equity that could help the family empire. She let out a bitter laugh, and then he said something I never forgot. He looked me right in the eye and said, You are just like your mother. Stubborn. Brooklyn would be smarter. Brooklyn understands duty. I felt sick. He said that? He did. He was grooming you. Brooklyn. All those years he praised you for being responsible? All those times Lorna told everyone what a good little saver you were? They weren't complimenting you. They were assessing your yield. They were fattening you up. I hung up the phone and walked into the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection. I remembered the story my mother loved to tell at parties. When Brooklyn was 7, she saved her entire allowance for a year to buy us an anniversary present. She is such a selfless soul. I had always preened under that story. I thought it meant I was good. Now I realized it meant I was useful. 2 days later, on a Saturday evening, I pulled my car into the overflow lot of the Cresthaven Community Center. Tonight was the annual Winter Warmth Gala, hosted by the Mitford Hearth Foundation, my parents' charity. The foundation's stated mission was to provide heating assistance to elderly residents in the county. In reality, it was a tax-exempt vehicle for my parents to throw parties and give each other awards. I was not invited, but I knew the door guy, an old high school friend named Jerry, and I knew he wouldn't turn me away. I wore a black dress, simple and severe, with no jewelry. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to observe. I wanted to see the monster in its natural habitat. I slipped in through the side entrance. The ballroom was bathed in amber light, smelling of expensive perfume and prime rib. There were about 200 people there. local politicians, business owners, the social elite of our specific zip code. I stood in the shadows near the bar, nursing a club soda. My parents were at the head table, of course. Grant was wearing a tuxedo that strained slightly at the buttons. Lorna was in shimmering gold, looking like a trophy. Grant stood up to speak. The room quieted. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice booming with that practiced, charismatic warmth that had fooled me for decades. "We are gathered here to talk about legacy. What do we leave behind? Not just money, but values, care, family." He swept his hand toward the table. "The Mitford Hearth Foundation is about family. It is about ensuring that no one is left out in the cold." I almost choked on my soda. No one left out in the cold. He had literally told me to sit in the kitchen 3 days ago. "And speaking of future," Grant continued, "I want to introduce the new director of strategic initiatives for the foundation, my son, Evan Mitchell." Evan stood up. He looked terrified. He was wearing a suit that was too big for him, and his smile was a rictus of panic. He waved to the crowd. There was polite applause. I watched Lorna. She was beaming, clapping her hands, looking at Evan with adoring eyes. Then, her gaze drifted across the room. She saw me. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I just stood there, holding my glass, looking at her. For a second, her smile faltered. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Then, as if a shutter had clicked, she simply looked through me. She turned her head, said something to the woman next to her, and laughed. It was a masterclass in erasure. To her, I wasn't a threat. I wasn't a daughter. I was a stain on the tablecloth, something to be ignored until the help cleaned it up. I turned away, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. I headed toward the restrooms, needing a moment to breathe. As I turned the corner into the quiet hallway, I nearly collided with a woman carrying a stack of file folders. "Oh, excuse me," she gasped. I looked at her. It was Tessa Wren. Tessa was the foundation's part-time bookkeeper. She was a quiet, nervous woman in her 50s who had always been kind to me. "Brooklyn?" she said, clutching the folders to her chest. Her eyes darted toward the ballroom door. "Hi, Tessa," I said. She looked pale. You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Why?" I asked. "Is there a rule against disowned daughters?" "No, I mean—" Tessa stepped closer, lowering her voice to a frantic hiss. "Your father, he gave the staff a list. If you showed up, we were supposed to call security. He said you were mentally unstable and might cause a scene." I felt the blood drain from my face. They weren't just ignoring me. They were actively discrediting me. "I am not unstable." "Tessa," I said softly. "I know," she said. Her eyes filled with tears. "I know you are not. I have known you since you were 12. She looked down at the folders in her arms. Her knuckles were white. "Brooklyn," she said, her voice barely audible. "I am leaving. I put in my notice yesterday. I can't do it anymore." "Do what?" "The math," she said. "The math doesn't work." She looked up at me, and the fear in her eyes was palpable. "I am not supposed to talk to you. I signed an NDA, but what?" "Your name," she whispered. "It shows up in the ledgers. A lot. More than it should for someone who isn't on the payroll." "What do you mean?" "Reimbursements," she said. "Consulting fees. Guarantees. There are entries labeled B. Mitchell. Contribution that date back 5 years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Brooklyn, on paper. It looks like you are the biggest donor and the biggest liability the foundation has." My knees felt weak. They were laundering money through my name. They were using me to balance the books. "Tessa," I said, grabbing her arm. "Do you have proof?" She pulled away, terrified. "I have to go. If Grant sees me talking to you—" "Tessa, please, I made copies," she stammered. "For my own protection. In case the IRS comes. Keep them safe." I said, "Please, don't destroy them." She nodded once, looking like a deer in the headlights, and then hurried down the hall. disappearing into the service exit. I stood alone in the hallway. The muffled sound of applause drifted from the ballroom. They were clapping for Grant. They were clapping for the man who had stolen my name, my credit, and my history to build a monument to his own ego. I walked out the side door into the cold night air. The drive home was different than the drive on Thanksgiving. There was no adrenaline. There was no anger. There was only a vast, crushing grief. I cried then. Not the polite, silent crying I had mastered as a child, but ugly, heaving sobs that shook my shoulders as I gripped the steering wheel. I wasn't crying because they took my chair. I wasn't crying because of the money. I was crying because I finally understood the truth. I had never been their daughter. I had never been a person to them. I was a resource. I was a backup generator they kept in the basement, ignored until the lights flickered. I was a credit score. I was a signature. I was an asset class. The parents I had tried to please for 33 years did not exist. They were fictional characters played by con artists who happened to share my DNA. I turned onto my street. The tears dried on my face, leaving my skin tight. The grief was heavy, but it was finite. It had a bottom, and as I pulled into my driveway, I felt myself hit that bottom and stand up. They had killed the daughter, but they had awakened the creditor, and the creditor was coming to collect. I walked into the house. Miles was waiting. "Did you see them?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And?" I walked over to the whiteboard in our kitchen, where we kept our grocery list. I picked up a marker. "We are not victims, Miles," I said. "We are witnesses." I wrote a name on the board, Tessa Wren, and then I wrote another word, audit. It is time to close their account. I said, the week following the gala was a blur of administrative violence. That was the only way I could describe it. It was not a physical fight, but it felt like one. It was a war waged with certified mail, notarized affidavits, and hours spent on hold listening to tinny classical music while my stomach churned with acid. Avery Halden was the general of this quiet war. She sat in her office, her posture rigid, dictating letters to the credit bureaus with a terrifying precision. We filed formal disputes with TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. We placed a fraud alert on my Social Security number that was so comprehensive I would likely need a blood sample to buy a pack of gum in the future. But the real breakthrough came when Avery suggested we look into the banking side of the Mitford Hearth Foundation. If they are using your name to secure loans, Avery had said, tapping a pen against her chin, then they might have listed you as an officer of the foundation to legitimize the structure. It is a common tactic. It makes the nepotism look like succession planning. She was right. We called the fictional Merchants and Planters Bank. Where the foundation held its primary operating account, I identified myself as Brooklyn Mitchell. I did not say I was a director. I simply gave my name and asked for the status of the account. The teller did not hesitate. "Oh, yes, Ms. Mitchell, you are listed as the secretary-treasurer on the signature card as of last March. Did you need the current balance?" The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the phone. Miles watching me from the chair opposite, his face pale. "Yes," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I would like to know about the recent activity, specifically, any large withdrawals." "Well," the teller said, clicking away, "there were 3 transfers in the last month labeled Director Reimbursement going to the external account ending in 409, $12,000 on the 1st, $8,000 on the 15th, and another $10,000 yesterday." "Thank you," I said. "And could you tell me who authorized those?" "They were initiated via the online portal," the teller said, using the admin login. I hung up the phone and looked at Avery. "They made me the treasurer," I said, my voice hollow. "And they are siphoning money out of the charity account into their personal account. The account ending in 409 is my father's primary checking. Avery wrote this down. That is embezzlement, Brooklyn. And because you are the treasurer on paper, if the IRS audits them, you are the one who goes to prison." The realization hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just stolen my credit, they had set me up as the fall guy. They had built a glass house of fraud and put me in the center of it. handing me a stone I didn't know I was holding. "I need to talk to Evan." I said, "I chose the Lakebriar Diner because it was 40 minutes away from Cresthaven, in a town where nobody knew the Mitchell name. It was a neutral zone. It smelled of bacon grease and old coffee, a scent that felt grounding compared to the sterile terror of the bank records." I sat in a booth in the back, watching the door. I had texted Evan that morning. "I know about Harbor Sage. I know about the foundation. Meet me at noon, or I call the FBI." He arrived at 12:10. Evan looked terrible. He was usually the picture of casual, wealthy ease. Golf shirts, expensive watches, hair perfectly styled. Today, he wore a wrinkled hoodie and jeans that looked like he had slept in them. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. He slid into the booth opposite me, not making eye contact. He signaled the waitress for coffee, his hand shaking slightly. "You look like hell." "Evan," I said. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Good to see you too." "Brooke, I didn't waste time on pleasantries." I reached into my bag and pulled out the file folder Avery had prepared. I slid the paper across the table. It was the printout of the Harbor Sage inquiry, along with the summary of the failed security questions. "Explain this," I said. Evan looked at the paper. He didn't pick it up. He just stared at the logo. "I didn't do it," he said, his voice quiet. "I didn't ask if you typed it. Evan, I asked you to explain it. You sent me a text saying Dad was under pressure. You said I could fix this. Is this how I was supposed to fix it? By becoming a ghost co-signer for a loan I never agreed to?" Evan rubbed his face with both hands. "Dad is drowning." "Brooke," he said, his voice muffled by his palms. "You don't understand." The market turned on him. He was leveraged on those commercial properties in Baltimore, and the tenants bailed. He has been carrying 3 mortgages on the Cresthaven house just to service the debt on the business loans. 3 mortgages? I asked, stunned. The house was supposed to be paid off 10 years ago. He refinanced, Evan said, dropping his hands, again and again, and now the equity is gone. The house is underwater, and he needs liquidity to keep the foundation running because he is using the foundation to pay the mortgages. I finished. Evan nodded miserably. "And his new business? The one you were supposed to be launching?" "It doesn't exist," Evan whispered. "It is a shell." He needed a reason to apply for the business line of credit with Harbor Sage. "He made me the CEO and you the guarantor because his credit is shot. He maxed out everything. Brooke, he has nothing left but the reputation." I stared at my brother. I felt a surge of pity, quickly replaced by a cold, hard anger. "So you knew?" I said, "You knew he was using my name. He told me you agreed." Evan protested, his voice rising. People in the diner turned to look. He lowered his voice, leaning in. "He told me you and he had a private arrangement. He said you were helping out because of the tuition." I frowned. "What tuition?" "Your college tuition," Evan said. "He said you owed the family. He said he paid for your degree, so you were paying him back by letting him use your credit for a while. He calls it the return on investment." The world stopped. I sat very still. The waitress arrived and poured coffee into Evan's mug. The steam rose up between us, a foggy barrier. "Evan," I said, my voice dangerously low, "I paid for my own college." Evan looked confused. "What? No. Dad always talks about it, how he wrote those checks to the university, how it crippled his savings, but he did it for you." I reached into my bag again. I had brought everything. I pulled out a different folder, this one labeled Personal Banking 2008 to 2012. I opened it and turned it toward him. "Look at the dates." "Evan," I pointed to a series of highlighted entries. "Grant paid the tuition up front." "Yes," I said, because the university required a certified check and my student loans hadn't processed yet. "But look here." I pointed to a transfer of $5,000, then another for $3,000, then a cashier's check for $10,000. I paid him back. I said, "Every single cent. I worked 3 jobs. I waited tables at the Rusty Anchor. I tutored. I worked the desk at the library. I sent him checks every month for 4 years until the debt was zero. Evan stared at the numbers. But, he said, his brow furrowing, I remember those checks. Mom said those were you helping with the mortgage. She said you were contributing to the household because you were such a responsible girl. I laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. They lied to you. Evan. They took my money, which was a repayment for a loan, and they told you it was a gift. They framed it as me helping so they could keep the moral high ground. And now, 10 years later, Grant is claiming I still owe him for the money I already returned? Evan looked sick. He pushed his coffee away. He truly believes it. Brooke, that is the scary part. He has told the story so many times that he believes I am the golden child, and you are the investment that needs to pay dividends. He doesn't think he is stealing. He thinks he is collecting. I leaned back against the vinyl booth. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just greed. It was a delusion so deep it had rewritten our entire family history. And what about you? Evan, I asked, what is your role in this play? I am the distraction, he said bitterly. I am the screw-up. As long as everyone is focused on my failed startups and my anxiety, nobody looks too closely at Dad's bookkeeping. I let them do it because they pay my rent. I am trapped. Brooke, if I blow the whistle, I am homeless. You are not homeless, I said. You are 30 years old. You could get a job. He looked at me with tragic, wet eyes. I don't know how to do anything else. This is all I have ever been. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the tragedy of my parents' parenting. They had broken my legs to keep me close, but they had cut off Evan's feet entirely. I stood up. I am not your investment, Evan, and I am not your guarantor. Wait, Evan said, reaching for my hand but stopping short. What are you going to do? I am going to stop them, I said. Please, he whispered. Don't destroy them. They destroyed themselves. Evan, I am just turning on the lights. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was screaming. The tuition. The lie about the tuition was the linchpin. It was the moral justification Grant used to sleep at night. He had convinced himself that I was property he had purchased, and therefore he had the right to leverage me. When I got home, Miles was in the kitchen. Talking on the phone, he held up a hand, signaling me to wait. Yes, I understand. Thank you. Tessa, we will be careful. He hung up and looked at me. His face was grim. That was Tessa Wren, he said. She called the house line. She was too scared to call your cell in case your parents have access to your bill records. What did she say? I asked, dropping my purse on the counter. She quit today, Miles said. She walked out. But before she left, she saw something on Grant's desk. What? A guarantee form, Miles said. A new one. For a different lender. This one wasn't blank. Brooklyn. My stomach dropped. It was signed? Miles nodded. It was signed. With your name. She said it looked like a photocopy of your signature from an old birthday card or a check. Pasted onto the document. It was sloppy, but it might pass a cursory inspection. I felt the blood rush in my ears. They had escalated. When I didn't sign the first one, they decided to forge the second one. We have to go to the police. Miles said, now, tonight. I paced the kitchen floor. The tile felt cold under my feet. If we go to the police with a story about a witness who saw a paper, Grant will deny it. He will shred the document before the cops even knock on the door. He will say Tessa is a disgruntled employee who is lying. So we just let him bankrupt you? Miles shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. No, I said, stopping my pacing. We don't let him do anything, but we don't react impulsively. That is what they want. They want me to come screaming into the driveway so they can call me hysterical. They want to make this about my emotions, not their crimes. I walked over to the whiteboard where I had written audit. We need the document. I said, we need the physical proof. How are we going to get that? Miles asked. Break into the house? No, I said, we are going to let them give it to us. My phone chimed. I looked at the screen. It was a text from Lorna. Brooklyn. Sweetheart, Dad and I have been thinking. We were too harsh at Thanksgiving. We are all just stressed. Let's do Christmas properly. Fresh start. We want to make it up to you. Please come home. We have a gift for you. I read the text aloud to Miles. A gift. Miles scoffed. Probably a bill. No, I said, reading between the lines. The text was desperate. It was too sweet. Too fast. Fresh start. They need me in the room. I said, why? Because the bank probably requires a wet signature verification, or a notary, or something they can't fake with a photocopy. Or maybe they just need to sweet-talk me into not looking at my credit report for another month. I looked at the text again. We have a gift for you. It was a trap. A beautiful, wreath-adorned trap. They wanted to lure me back into the house, surround me with nostalgia and guilt, and get what they wanted. I felt a shift inside me. It was a subtle click, like a lock engaging. For weeks, I had been trying to figure out how to make them hear me, how to make them understand that I was a person, that my feelings mattered. I had wanted an apology. I had wanted them to admit they were wrong. But you cannot reason with a parasite. You cannot ask a leech to apologize for drinking your blood. It is just doing what it does. I stopped wanting to be believed. I started focusing on what could be proven. I looked at Miles. Reply to her. I said, what? You are not going? Yes, I am. I said, and you are coming with me, and we are bringing Denise, and we are going to ask Tessa if she is brave enough to stand in the room. Brooklyn, this is dangerous. I know. I said, but I'm not going there to eat turkey. I am going there to collect evidence. I picked up the phone and typed a reply to my mother. Okay, Mom, we will be there. Looking forward to the fresh start. I hit send. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was necessary. I walked over to the table where we had piled the credit reports, the bank statements, the emails, and the notes from Evan. We are going to build a binder. I said, a binder? I want a timeline, Miles. I want every transfer, every text, every lie, arranged chronologically. I want the tuition payments I made matched against the dates they claimed I was borrowing. I want the emails where Grant talks about legacy matched against the foreclosure notices on the commercial properties. I picked up a red pen. When we walk into that house on Christmas, I am not going to argue with them. I am going to depose them. Miles looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. You are scary when you are like this, he said quietly. I am not scary, I said, staring at the timeline. I am just finally acting like the investment they always said I was. I looked at the entry for Harbor Sage. They wanted a return on investment. I whispered. I drew a sharp, red line through the name. They are going to get one. The next few days were a masterclass in covert operations. Avery Halden helped us draft formal demand letters that we kept in reserve, ready to be handed over the moment the confrontation occurred. We contacted the bank again, this time recording the call. Maryland is a two-party consent state, so we informed the teller this line was being recorded for quality assurance, which she assumed meant her quality assurance, not ours. We got the transaction numbers. I called Denise. I am going to Christmas. I told her. You are insane, she said. I need you there. Aunt Denise, not to fight, but to watch. Watch what? Watch Grant when I ask him for the paperwork. There was a silence on the line. Then Denise sighed. I will bring the good wine, she said. We are going to need it. Then came the hardest call. Tessa Wren. I met her in the parking lot of a grocery store, 3 towns over. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold her keys. I can't go back there. Brooklyn, she said. Grant scares me. He screams at the walls when he thinks no one is listening. I don't need you to stay. I said, I just need you to walk in. Just for 5 minutes. Why? Because you are the only one who knows where the bodies are buried. If you walk in, he will know the game is over. He will know that I know. And if he fires me, he can't fire you. Tessa, you already quit. And if he threatens you, you tell him you have already mailed the copies to the IRS. She looked at me, her eyes wide. Have I? We will make sure you have. I said, by tomorrow morning. She took a deep breath. She looked at her hands, worn from years of counting other people's money. He treated you like garbage, she said softly. For years, I watched him do it. I watched him buy Evan a car while you were driving that old sedan with the broken heater, and I didn't say anything. You can say something now. I said. She nodded slowly. Okay, I will come. Christmas Eve arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. Snow was threatening, the air heavy and still. I stood in my bedroom, dressing for the execution. I chose a dress of deep forest green, high-necked and formidable. I put on the pearl earrings I had bought for myself when I got my first promotion, the ones Lorna had sneered at, calling them sussed. Miles walked in. Wearing his suit, he looked like he was going to a funeral. Do you have the folder? I asked. He patted the leather satchel by the door. Copies in the bag, originals in the safe, digital backups in the cloud. Good. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. I didn't see the scared girl from Thanksgiving. I didn't see the disappointing daughter. I saw a woman who had survived a long, slow drowning and had finally learned to breathe underwater. I am ready, I said. We got into the car. The drive to Cresthaven was silent. The streets were lined with festive lights, inflatable Santas, and blinking reindeer. It all looked grotesque to me now. A thin veneer of joy painted over the rot. As we turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan. He is in a mood. Be careful. He has papers on the desk. I smiled. A cold, sharp smile. He has papers on the desk. Perfect. I turned to Miles. Don't let me sit down, I said. He looked at me, confused. When we get there, I said, even if they put the chair back, don't let me sit. Why? Because, I said, looking at the looming brick fortress of my parents' house, I am not a guest, and I am not family. I am the auditor, an auditor's stand. The envelope from Briarwood Title and Trust arrived on a Tuesday, sandwiched between a flyer for a pizza place and a catalog for winter coats. It looked innocuous enough, a standard business envelope with a cellophane window, but when I picked it up, it felt heavy, as if it carried more than just paper. I stood in my kitchen, the winter light fading into a bruised purple through the window, and slit the envelope open. The document inside was printed on thick, cream-colored linen paper. The header was embossed. It was titled Notice of Pending Property Adjustment and Consent to Transfer. I scanned the dense legal paragraphs, my eyes catching on specific phrases that made the blood drain from my face. Pursuant to the verbal agreement. Transfer of equity interest in the property located at 14 Maple Ridge Drive. Guarantor consent assumed unless written objection is received within 48 hours. I read the last line again. Guarantor consent assumed. They were trying to move equity out of their house, the house that was already underwater, according to Evan, and they were attaching my name to the transaction. But the terrifying part was the mechanism. They weren't asking me to sign. They were notifying me that they had already told the title company I would sign, and if I didn't scream stop in 2 days, the machinery would grind forward without me. It was a presumptive close. It was a sales tactic used on weak clients. Now being used on a daughter, I did not call my parents. I did not scream into a pillow. I walked to my home office, scanned the document, and emailed it to Avery Halden with the subject line, "They are escalating." Avery called me 10 minutes later. Her voice was not soothing. It was the sharp, metallic tone of a sword being drawn. "This is a pressure tactic. Brooklyn," she said. "They are trying to force a silence as consent scenario. It is legally gray and incredibly risky for the title company, which tells me your father probably lied to the agent there. He probably told them you are traveling and that you gave him power of attorney." "Power of attorney?" I choked out. "I never gave him that." "I know," Avery said, "but Grant operates on the assumption that he can smooth-talk his way out of the details later. He needs this transfer to go through to cover a margin call or a debt payment, and he is using you as the equity bridge. What do I do?" We fire back. Avery said, "I am drafting a formal cease and desist to Briarwood Title right now. I will explicitly state that you have not consented, that you do not hold power of attorney for anyone, and that any document purporting to carry your signature is a forgery. I am also going to demand their entire audit trail. I want to know who submitted the request, from what IP address, and what phone number was used. She paused, the sound of her typing furious in the background. Brooklyn, this is not just financial maneuvering anymore. This is desperation. They are throwing furniture into the fire to keep the engine running. You need to understand exactly how the money is moving. I have a meeting tonight. I said. Aunt Denise set it up. Good, Avery said. Get the map, because you are going to need it to navigate the minefield they have laid for you. Rowan Pike met me at a coffee shop in downtown Bethesda. It was a hipster place with exposed brick and overpriced lattes, the kind of place my father would mock as pretentious, while secretly wishing he owned it. Rowan was not what I expected. Denise had described him as a forensic accountant, and I had pictured a dusty old man with wire-rimmed glasses. Rowan was my age, wearing a sharp navy suit and an expression of permanent, weary skepticism. He had a laptop open before I even sat down. You must be the niece, he said, not looking up from the screen. Denise said you are smart, but you have a blind spot for family. I had a blind spot, I corrected. Sitting down, it has been surgically removed. Rowan looked up then, a small smile playing on his lips. Good, because what I am about to show you requires 20/20 vision. He spun the laptop around. The screen displayed a complex web of boxes and arrows, looking like a flowchart for a conspiracy theory. Denise gave me the basics, and I did some digging into public records regarding the Mitford Hearth Foundation. Rowan said, he pointed to a large box in the center. Here's the charity. It is a 501c3, which means it is tax-exempt. Its stated mission is heating assistance for the elderly. I nodded. That is what they say at the galas. Right, Rowan said. And they do give out some grants. About 5% of their revenue goes to actual heating bills. That is just enough to keep the IRS from revoking their status immediately. And the rest? I asked. He pointed to a series of arrows leading away from the center box. The rest goes to administrative costs, consulting fees, travel and research. He clicked a file, opening a spreadsheet. Your father pays himself a salary as executive director, which is legal, but then he also pays a consulting firm called GM Strategies. Guess who owns GM Strategies? Grant Mitchell. I said, correct. And then there are the board retreats. Last year, the foundation spent $40,000 on a retreat to Aspen. The agenda listed strategic planning. The receipts show ski lift tickets and a lot of expensive wine. I felt a wave of nausea. They were using the charity as a piggy bank. But here's where you come in, Rowan said, his voice dropping. He highlighted a column labeled guarantees. Charities can take out loans, just like businesses, but banks are wary of charities because they don't have hard assets. So, the bank asks for a personal guarantee from the directors. I leaned in, reading the names listed in the column. Grant Mitchell, Lorna Mitchell, and there, listed on a loan from 3 years ago, Brooklyn Mitchell, Secretary-Treasurer. I never signed that, I whispered. Rowan looked at me with sympathy. It doesn't matter if you signed it, legally speaking, until you prove you didn't. If the foundation defaults on that loan, the bank comes after the guarantors. They come after your house, your wages, your savings, and the foundation is going to default. I said, it wasn't a question. Rowan nodded. They are robbing Peter to pay Paul. But Peter is broke, and Paul is hiring a lawyer. The burn rate is unsustainable. Your father is trying to plug the holes with new loans. Hence the Harbor Sage inquiry you told Denise about. It is a Ponzi scheme. Brooklyn. But the only investors are banks and family members. He closed the laptop. There is one more thing. He said, what? I checked the real estate listings, not the public ones on Zillow. The private MLS notes. My heart hammered against my ribs. Your parents' house in Cresthaven is for sale, Rowan said. I stared at him. But we were just there. It didn't look like it was for sale. It is a pocket listing, Rowan explained. That means it is being marketed privately to select brokers. No yard sign, no open house. The seller demands total confidentiality because he doesn't want the neighbors to know he is liquidating. Grant is selling the house, I said, the realization settling like lead. He is trying to. Rowan said, but the asking price is $2 million. Based on the liens I found, he owes about $2.2 million on it. He is underwater. He can't sell it without bringing cash to the closing table. Cash he doesn't have. I said, exactly. Unless he can get a bridge loan or convince a family member to sign over some equity or take on a debt. The letter from Briarwood Title flashed in my mind. Pending property adjustment. He is trying to refinance the debt onto me. I said, he wants to sell the house, pay off the mortgage, and leave me holding the bag for the difference. Rowan nodded slowly. That is the play. It is the exit strategy. He burns the house, escapes with his reputation intact, and leaves you in the ashes. I sat back in the hard wooden chair. I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was too evil to process emotionally. It was just math now. Thank you. Rowan, I said. He reached into his bag and pulled out a flash drive. I put everything on here, he said. The tax returns, the loan docs I could find, the listing notes. I took the drive. It felt light, insignificant, but it was a nuclear warhead. Be careful. Brooklyn, Rowan said as he stood up. People who build houses of cards are terrified of the wind, and you are about to become a hurricane. I drove home in silence, the flash drive burning a hole in my pocket. I needed to talk to Evan. I needed to know if he knew about the sale. But before I could call him, my phone lit up. It was Evan. I answered on the first ring. Evan? He was breathing hard. The sound jagged and wet, as if he had been running. He knows, Evan gasped. Oh God. Brooke, he knows. Knows what? He knows we met. He knows about the diner. How? He tracks my phone, Evan said, his voice breaking. I forgot. The family plan. He has find my friends on all of us. He saw I was in Lake Briar for an hour. He cornered me in the kitchen tonight. He demanded to know who I was with. What did you tell him? I tried to lie. Brooke, I swear. I said I was seeing a girl, but he kept pushing. He got in my face. He started screaming about loyalty. I panicked. I told him I saw you. I closed my eyes. Gripping the steering wheel, I could picture it perfectly. The pristine kitchen, the marble countertops, my father's face purple with rage. What did he say? I asked. He didn't scream. Evan said, that was the scary part. He went quiet. He started laughing. A really low, crazy laugh. He said, so she is building a case. My own daughter is building a case. Evan, listen to me. Did he say anything about the house? About selling it? Evan went silent. Evan? He told me to pack a bag. Evan whispered. He said we might be taking a trip after Christmas. He said the house is too big for us anyway. He is running. I thought, he is going to cash out whatever he can and run. Brooke, Evan said, his voice trembling. He is making calls. He called Aunt Sarah. He called the pastor. He called your cousin Mike. Why? He is telling them you are sick. My stomach twisted. Sick? He is telling them you are having a breakdown. Evan said, he is saying the pressure of your job and the fertility issues. He told them you have fertility issues. Brooke, he said it made you snap. He said you are paranoid and imagining things. He is telling everyone that if you say anything crazy, it is just the illness talking. I felt a cold rage settle over me. It was the oldest trick in the abuser's handbook. If you can't silence the witness, you destroy their credibility. He is trying to bury me. I said softly, he is terrified. Evan said, he said you are unstable and that the family needs to rally around you by ignoring your outbursts. I ended the call. I didn't say goodbye. I couldn't. My phone buzzed again immediately. A text from my cousin Mike. Hey, Cause. Just heard you're going through a rough patch. Thinking of you. Let me know if you need to talk. But try to rest, okay? Don't stress yourself out. I stared at the screen. Rough patch. Try to rest. It was working. Grant had seeded the narrative. Another text. This one from Mrs. Gabley, the church deaconess. Praying for your mental peace. Brooklyn. The Lord gives us challenges, but family is the anchor. Listen to your parents. They love you so much. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone through the windshield. They were weaponizing their concern. They were wrapping their betrayal in the language of love and faith. I didn't reply to any of them. I drove home, the road blurring not from tears, but from the sheer speed of my thoughts. The next morning, the war came to my office. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized logistics firm. It was a good job, one I had built with years of overtime and meticulous attention to detail. My reputation was my armor. At 10 a.m., an email popped up from the director of HR. Subject: Confidential inquiry. Brooklyn. Do you have a moment to stop by my office? We received a query regarding external board commitments that we need to clarify. I walked to HR with my head held high, but my hands were shaking. The HR director, a woman named Linda who had always been kind to me, looked uncomfortable. She gestured for me to sit and close the door. Brooklyn. This is awkward, Linda said. We received a phone call this morning. It was anonymous, but the caller claimed to be a concerned vendor connected to the Mitford Hearth Foundation. I sat very still. The caller alleged that there might be a conflict of interest involving your role as treasurer of that foundation and your procurement responsibilities here. Linda said, they implied that foundation funds were being commingled with personal accounts and hinted that, well, that you were the signatory. I felt the room spin. Grant. It had to be Grant. Or maybe Lorna. They were scorching the earth. They knew that if I lost my job, I would lose my resources. I would be vulnerable. Linda, I said, keeping my voice level, I am not the treasurer of that foundation. My name was placed on documents without my consent. I am currently in the process of legal action to have it removed. This call is part of a harassment campaign by the individuals involved in that fraud. Linda blinked. Fraud? Yes. I am happy to provide you with a copy of the cease and desist letter my attorney sent yesterday, as well as an affidavit stating I have no operational control over that charity. Linda looked relieved. Okay, that would be very helpful. We just have to investigate every compliance tip. I understand, I said. I walked back to my desk, my legs feeling like jelly. They had crossed the final line. They weren't just stealing my money. They were trying to destroy my ability to earn it. They wanted me broken, unemployed, and dependent, or at least discredited enough that no one would believe me when the indictment came down. I sat at my desk and opened a new file folder. I labeled it The End. That night, the house was quiet. Miles was in the kitchen making tea. I sat on the living room floor. The contents of my investigation spread out around me like the debris of a plane crash. There was the letter from Briarwood Title. There was the printout of the Harbor Sage inquiry. There was the flash drive from Rowan. There were the screenshots of the texts from my concerned relatives. There was the handwritten note from Tessa Wren, which she had mailed to me, detailing the forged signatures. I picked up a 3-ring binder. It was black, heavy, and severe. I began to organize. Tab 1, Identity Theft, the Harbor Sage documents. Tab 2, Embezzlement, the bank transfer records showing the money flowing from the charity to Grant's personal account. Tab 3, Real Estate Fraud, the Briarwood letter and the pocket listing notes. Tab 4, Defamation, the texts and the log of the call to my HR department. I punched holes in the pages. The sound of the hole punch was rhythmic, like a gavel banging. I wasn't sad anymore. The grief I had felt after the gala had evaporated, boiled away by the sheer heat of their malice. What was left was something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. Brooklyn? Miles stood in the doorway, 2 mugs in his hands. I looked up. You are going back, aren't you? He asked. I took the mug from him. Yes, I said. He sat down beside me, looking at the binder. They are going to try to hurt you. Brooklyn, they have already called your job. They have poisoned the family against you. If you walk into that house, they are going to come at you with everything they have. I know. I said, so why go? Why not just mail copies of this to the Attorney General and be done with it? Because, I said, tracing the spine of the binder, if I just send it to the police, Grant will spin it. He will play the victim. He will tell the world his daughter betrayed him. I looked Miles in the eye. I need them to admit it. Not to me, but to the room. I need to strip the varnish off the furniture and show everyone the rot underneath. I need Aunt Denise to see it. I need Evan to see it. And I need to see their faces when they realize I am not the disappointed little girl anymore. Miles nodded slowly. He reached out and took my hand. I am coming with you, he said. I know you offered. I said, but Miles, if you come, you can't interfere. You can't punch Grant. You can't scream at Lorna. I won't punch anyone, Miles said, his jaw tightening. Unless they touch you, you are not coming for protection. Miles, I said, you are coming as a witness. I want them to see us. A united front. I want them to see what a real partnership looks like. I picked up my phone. It was December 23rd. The Fresh Start Christmas dinner was tomorrow. I opened the thread with my mother. Her last text was a picture of a wreath with the caption, "Can't wait to hug you." I typed, "I'll be there. Don't prepare a chair. Prepare honesty." I pressed send. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Drama. Lorna replied. I stared at the word. Drama. It was their favorite shield. Anything that threatened their reality was drama. Any accountability was negativity. Any truth was an attack. They thought I was coming to make a scene. They thought I was coming to cry about the Thanksgiving chair again. They thought they could handle me with a few hugs, a glass of wine, and maybe a check for $500 to help with groceries. They truly didn't understand what was coming. They were preparing for a family squabble. I was preparing for a deposition. I closed the binder. The snap of the rings locking shut echoed in the silent room. Let's get some sleep. I told Miles, we have a big day tomorrow. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. Snow was beginning to fall, dusting the world in white. It looked clean. It looked peaceful. But I knew what lay beneath the snow. Tomorrow, I would bring the shovel. The gravel of the driveway crunched under our tires, a sound that usually signaled the beginning of a holiday headache, but today sounded like the opening salvo of a siege. The house at 14 Maple Ridge Drive was ablaze with light. Every window glowed with a golden, curated warmth. A 12-foot fir tree stood in the bay window, draped in ribbons and heirloom ornaments, projecting an image of pristine domestic bliss to the entire neighborhood. I turned off the ignition. The engine ticked into silence. Are you ready? Miles asked. He was gripping the door handle, his knuckles white. I looked at the black binder in my lap. I ran my hand over the cool plastic cover. I am not ready to fight, I said. I am ready to finish it. We stepped out into the biting December cold. The air smelled of wood smoke and impending snow. I smoothed the front of my green dress, checked that my phone was recording in my purse, and walked up the brick path. I didn't knock. I used my key. It was the last time I would ever use it. The foyer was a sensory assault of cinnamon and expensive perfume. Christmas jazz played softly from invisible speakers. Lorna was standing near the staircase, adjusting a garland. When she saw us, her face lit up with a performance-ready smile, though her eyes remained watchful, scanning me for weapons. "Brooklyn," she cried, rushing forward with her arms outstretched. "You made it. And Miles. So glad you could come." She hugged me. Her body felt stiff, vibrating with tension. I didn't hug back. I stood like a statue until she pulled away, her smile faltering just a fraction. Come in, she chirped, ushering us toward the living room. "Everyone is here. Denise brought some lovely wine, and your father is just opening a bottle." We walked into the living room. It was a tableau of the American dream. A roaring fire crackled in the hearth. Evan was sitting in an armchair, staring into a glass of eggnog like it was a crystal ball showing him a grim future. Aunt Denise was on the sofa, holding a wineglass by the stem, her eyes sharp and alert. She gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. Grant stood by the mantel. He looked the part of the benevolent patriarch. Velvet smoking jacket, a glass of red wine in hand, a flush on his cheeks that could have been holiday cheer or high blood pressure. "There she is," he boomed, raising his glass. "The prodigal daughter returns." He walked over, intending to kiss my cheek. I took a half step back. He stopped, the rejection landing awkwardly in the space between us. He cleared his throat and pivoted, clapping Miles on the shoulder with too much force. "Good to see you, Miles. Glad you could drag her out of the office." We moved to the dining room. I stopped in the archway. The room was exactly as it had been at Thanksgiving, with one glaring difference. The table was set with the good china, the gold-rimmed plates, and the crystal goblets, and there, at the spot on the left side where the "No Seat for Disappointment" sign had been, was a chair. It wasn't just any chair. It was the head of the table chair from the kitchen set, draped in a festive red slipcover, looking comically plush and welcoming. It was a throne. "See?" Lorna whispered, leaning in close to my ear. "We fixed it. We made a special spot for you." The gesture was supposed to be an apology, but to me, it looked like bait. It was a trap lined with velvet. They had put the chair back not because they wanted me there, but because they needed me seated. "You cannot sign documents if you are standing near the door. Let's eat," Grant announced, gesturing grandly. Everyone moved toward the table. Evan shuffled to his seat. Denise sat down slowly, her eyes never leaving Grant. Miles stood behind the empty chair next to mine. I walked up to the red chair. I put my hand on the back of it. "Sit down, sweetheart," Lorna said, pulling out her own chair. "The soup is hot." I didn't sit. Grant remained standing at the head of the table, holding his wine glass high. "Before we begin," he said, his voice dropping to a register of practiced solemnity, "I want to propose a toast to family. Families are messy. We fight, we argue, we have misunderstandings, but at the end of the day, we are a team." He looked directly at me and to Brooklyn, who is so strong, so independent, sometimes a little too independent for her own good, but we love that about her. We are proud of you. "Brooke," he tilted his glass toward me. "To a fresh start," he said. Lorna murmured. "To a fresh start." Evan mumbled something into his chest. I stared at my father. The toast was a masterclass in manipulation. He had minimized the abuse as a misunderstanding. He had framed my boundaries as being too independent, and he had offered a fresh start that required me to swallow the past without complaint. If I drank to that, I was agreeing to the lie. If I sat down, I was accepting the premise. I reached into my bag. I placed the black binder on the table. It made a heavy, dull thud that echoed in the silence. "I am not drinking. Dad," I said. Grant's smile froze. He lowered his glass slowly. "Come on, Brooklyn," he said, a warning edge creeping into his voice. "It is Christmas Eve. Don't be difficult." "I am not being difficult," I said, my voice calm, steady, and loud enough to be heard in the kitchen. "I am being thorough." I opened the binder to the first tab. "You asked for a fresh start." I said, "I agree, but a fresh start requires a clean slate, and right now, this slate is covered in fraud." Lorna laughed. It was a high, brittle sound. "Oh, don't be silly. Fraud? That is such an ugly word." I looked at her. "Theft is an ugly word. Mom, forgery is an ugly word, but they are the accurate words." I turned to Grant. "Show me every document with my name on it." I said. The room went dead silent. The crackling of the fire suddenly seemed deafening. Grant stared at the binder. He took a sip of wine, his eyes hard above the rim of the glass. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said lightly. "You are clearly overtired. We can talk about business after the holidays." "No," I said. "We are talking about it now, because on November 2nd, an application was submitted to Harbor Sage Lending for a business line of credit in the amount of $200,000. The applicant used my Social Security number. The applicant used my mother's middle name as a security answer." Grant waved a hand dismissively. "That was a clerical error. I told the broker to use my info. He must have pulled your old file by mistake." "And the address?" I asked. 304 University Avenue? An address I haven't lived at in 10 years? Did the broker guess that too? Grant's jaw tightened. And the Briarwood title letter? I continued, flipping the page. The notice of a pending property adjustment regarding this house? The one that claimed I had given verbal consent to be a guarantor on a bridge loan so you could sell the property privately? Evan made a small, choking noise. He looked at Grant. You said you weren't selling the house. Evan whispered, Shut up. Evan, Grant snapped. He turned his full attention to me. The charm was gone. The benevolent patriarch had vanished, replaced by the cornered businessman. You don't understand adult matters. Brooklyn, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You think the world runs on clear-cut rules? You think you can just pay your bills and be safe? I am trying to save this family's legacy. I am moving assets around to protect us from a volatile market. It is high-level strategy. You wouldn't understand. I understand that you are broke. Dad, I said, Lorna gasped. Brooklyn, I understand that the foundation is bleeding money. I continued, relentless. I understand that you have siphoned $30,000 in the last month alone from the charity account to your personal checking. I understand that you are underwater on this house by at least $200,000. I pointed to the binder. I understand that you aren't protecting the legacy. You are eating it. Grant slammed his wineglass down on the table. Wine sloshed onto the white tablecloth, a blood-red stain spreading fast. Enough, he shouted. Who do you think you are? Coming into my house, eating my food, and accusing me of crimes? I am not eating your food. I said, and I am not accusing you. The bank records accuse you. The credit bureaus accuse you. Lorna stood up, her face crumbling into tears. After everything we did for you, she wailed. We gave you everything. We paid for your college. We supported you when you were just starting out. And this is how you repay us? By humiliating us in front of Denise? I looked at my mother. I felt a pang of the old guilt, the conditioned response to her tears. But then I remembered the text to my cousin. Rough patch. Unstable. I didn't debate her feelings. I didn't defend my character. I simply stated the reality. You removed my seat at Thanksgiving because I wouldn't give Evan $5,000. I said, you removed it because I stopped being a resource. That isn't love. Mom, that is leverage. You don't love me. You love the line of credit I provide. Lorna sobbed louder, looking at Evan for support. Evan just stared at his plate. Grant laughed, a cruel, barking sound. Leverage? He mocked. You are my child. You belong to this family. You owe us. I paid for your degree. I paid for your life. I paid you back, I shouted. It was the first time I raised my voice. The sound rang off the crystal. I paid you back every single cent of that tuition. I said, lowering my voice to a lethal whisper, I have the canceled checks. Dad, $45,000. I paid you. And you took that money, and you told Evan it was mortgage help. You lied to him to keep him loyal, and you lied to me to keep me indebted. Grant's face turned a mottled purple. You ungrateful little... He started to move around the table, his fists clenched. Miles stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He just moved his body between me and Grant. He stood 6'2", broad-shouldered and silent. Grant stopped. He looked at Miles, then back at me. Get out, Grant hissed. Get out of my house. Not yet, I said. I looked toward the hallway. I brought witnesses. Grant. Denise cleared her throat. I am here, Grant, and I have heard enough to call my own lawyer on Monday. Not you, I said. I looked at the archway leading to the kitchen. Tessa? I called out. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the swinging door pushed open. Tessa Wren walked into the dining room. She was wearing her winter coat, clutching her purse like a shield. She looked terrified, her eyes darting to Grant and then quickly away. Grant looked like he had seen a ghost. Tessa? He said, his voice cracking. What are you doing here? Get out. You are fired. I quit. Grant, Tessa said, her voice trembling but audible. I quit 3 days ago. She walked over to the table and placed a thick envelope next to my binder. I submitted the resignation to the board chairman this morning, Tessa said, and I sent copies of the ledgers to the compliance officer and to the IRS whistleblower hotline. Grant staggered back. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. You what? He whispered. I couldn't do it anymore, Tessa said, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't let you use Brooklyn's name. It wasn't right. Grant stared at her, his mouth opening and closing. Then, he exploded. It wasn't tears. It wasn't remorse. It was pure, unadulterated control. You traitor, he screamed. He lunged for the table, trying to grab the binder and the envelope. Miles blocked him with a forearm, not shoving, just holding the line. Grant flailed, knocking a crystal goblet onto the floor. It shattered with a spectacular crash. I made you, Grant screamed at Tessa. I gave you a job when no one else would. You are nothing without me. And you, he pointed a shaking finger at me. You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are out of the will. You are out of the family. I will ruin you. I will tell everyone you are crazy. I will drag your name through the mud until you can't get a job sweeping floors. Lorna was screaming now, a high-pitched keen. Evan was crying, his head in his hands. I stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos. This was it. This was the monster beneath the mask. I didn't shout back. I didn't cry. I picked up the binder. I picked up Tessa's envelope. You can't ruin me, Dad, I said, because you don't own me anymore. I took a step back. I have filed disputes with every credit bureau, I said. I have sent a cease and desist to Briarwood Title. I have alerted my HR department to your harassment. And Avery Halden has a drafted lawsuit for fraud and embezzlement ready to file if I see one more inquiry on my credit report. I looked at Lorna, who was clutching her pearls, staring at me with horror. If any further paperwork appears with my name on it, I said, I will pursue every available remedy. I will put you in prison, Dad. I will not hesitate. Grant was panting, leaning against the sideboard. He looked old. He looked defeated, but his eyes were still full of hate. Get out, he rasped. I am going, I said. I turned to Evan. He looked up, his face wet with tears. Brooke, he whispered, I am sorry. I looked at my brother. I loved him, but I could not save him. He had to save himself. If you want a relationship. Evan, I said, it has to exist outside their money. You have my number. Call me when you are ready for that. But do not call me for cash, and do not call me to fix this. I turned to Tessa. Do you have a ride? I asked. She nodded. My husband is waiting in the driveway. Go. I said. Tessa fled the room. I looked at Denise. Are you coming? I asked. Denise stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked at Grant with a mixture of pity and disgust. I think I have lost my appetite, she said. She walked out. Miles and I were the last ones standing. I looked at the table one last time, the wine stain, the shattered glass, the perfect roast turkey that no one would eat, and the red chair, the chair they had restored to trap me. I walked over to it. Brooklyn, Miles said warningly. I didn't sit. I picked it up. It was heavy. Solid oak. I lifted it with a strength I didn't know I had. I turned and walked out of the dining room, carrying the chair. Where are you taking that? Lorna shrieked. That is my chair. I walked through the foyer, past the tree, past the front door. I walked through the mudroom and kicked open the door to the garage. The garage was cold, smelling of gasoline and old cardboard. In the corner, there was a stack of boxes Grant had staged for the move he was planning. They were labeled in marker. Donate. I walked over to the pile. I set the chair down next to a box of old encyclopedias and a broken lamp. I dusted off my hands. You don't get access to me anymore, I said to the empty garage. And you don't get to offer me a seat. I walked back out to the driveway. The snow had started to fall in earnest now, large white flakes drifting down from the black sky. Miles was waiting by the car. Denise was in her sedan, the engine running. Tessa's taillights were fading down the street. I looked back at the house, I could see Grant standing in the window, watching me. He looked small. He looked like a man trapped in a glass cage of his own making. I got into the car. "Drive," I said. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. I watched the road ahead, white and clean and open. I had lost a family, but I had regained my name, and that was a trade I would make every single time. Thank you so much for listening to No Seat for Disappointments. This story was a journey into the dark side of family dynamics, and I hope Brooklyn's victory resonated with you. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Brooklyn handled her parents. Did she do the right thing by walking away? Let me know in the comments below. And please tell me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Revenge Stories channel so you never miss an episode. New stories are coming soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Stay strong, set your boundaries, and I'll see you in the next story.